Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's session in this four-part series that we have going on. Today's session is Unified Management of Multi-Regional VDI. As I mentioned, this is part 3 of a 4-part session. We had parts 1 and 2 in previous weeks and are recorded. Today's session will also be recorded. So if you logged in late or if there's something you wanted to cover or share with a colleague, keep an eye on your email box for a link to the recording as well as links to the previous sessions. Also, our final session in the series is next Tuesday, and we'll have a link to that as well. So again, keep an eye on that inbox for a link to the recording and for a link to the upcoming session as well. We are joined today by James Riley of Itopia and Thomas Lassois of Liquidware. We also have Don and Jason from HYCU as well, who are also partners in this, that are going to take us through today's presentation. But I think James is going to go ahead and start us off. So I'm going to go ahead and pass him the ball, and he can go ahead and start us off.
Great, thank you very much for the introduction. So let me just share my screen here. Can everyone see my screen?
I can, James.
All right, fantastic. 1 second here. So just to kind of kick off the agenda, we'll provide a quick recap of migrating VDI to Google Cloud. We're also going to discuss managing users across multiple regions from a single unified console. We'll also talk about automating these environments and providing the correct uptime and ways to optimize compute costs. We'll also discuss monitoring trends of user experience, app usage, and your cloud resource usage over time. And then we'll wrap up with Liquidware, really discussing their management best practices to deliver new apps, upgrades, and updated GPOs to workers on the fly. So a great piece of technology that couples very well with running VDI on GCP. So as a quick recap, we are 100% purpose-built Itopia for Google Cloud. We feel it provides us the best partner, especially on this cloud journey, as they can deliver great security that's on par with any other major cloud provider. They provide the lowest latency. They have many points of presence around the world, as well as a very dense fiber network that allows us to really utilize the backbone of their data centers and what Google has invested in. So we feel very strongly about this relationship and feel it provides our customers and yourself a great opportunity for success. So really the partners that you can use to deliver this service, one is Itopia. We're going to make it very easy for you to deliver a virtual desktop and app to any device, anywhere on GCP. Second is Liquidware, right? And they're really going to simplify managing users, desktops, and applications at scale on GCP. And definitely look forward to Thomas walking us through that later on. Lastly, HYCU is really going to go through how we enable continuous data protection for remote environments on GCP. So once it's all set up and running, how do we protect and save our data? And that's really going to be the highlight of the 4th webinar and final webinar of our 4-part series. So thank you everyone for joining us and coming back to learn more. So to really kind of recap how we're looking to migrate and modernize VDI, I think you as customers understand on the left side of the screen, there's a lot of complexity, expertise, and cost and management that goes into managing an on-prem VDI environment. And I think with the COVID-19 and the work from home, work from anywhere movement, people are really taking a step back to analyze what's the best practice for their VDI, work from home, and all that really goes around how do I bring along these Windows applications that need to travel with us as we go through digital transformation. So a majority of companies have relied on Windows PCs. There's a lot of different applications that were built around .NET and Win32 technology. And ultimately, the goal is how can we truly give our end users the ability to work from anywhere, really work with any device, and still get access to those crucial applications. So from an itopia perspective, we want to make this very easy to manage. So we have the Microsoft RDS technology, that's the main protocol that we're running, and it's hosted on Google Cloud. And really, itopia is going to provide you over 300 different automation tasks related to standing up and managing the end-to-end lifecycle of desktops and users and applications. And again, it's easy, simple, elegant, and scalable, which you'll see here today. So unified management, users, apps, infrastructure, reporting, and more all happen directly into the itopia console. And what you'll find is that you can manage hundreds, even thousands of users, a single deployment or many deployments directly from our console in the browser that you can access. And so really that's what I'll be highlighting today throughout the presentation. So the first thing I do want to show you all here is that as a user within your organization, you can first, as you see here in the top left quadrant of the screen, you can manage multiple deployments at once. So you can see this itopia test drive is outlining the deployment that we're on, but I was also in the process of spinning up a separate deployment. So as you can see, you as an administrator can manage multiple deployments under one instance of itopia. The second administrative thing I want to cover is that from an organizational standpoint, you can actually add admins into this environment. So let's say you're building this on behalf of one of your other business units, and maybe you have a technical IT leader there that needs to have access to this environment for their department. You can very easily add them here. You can give them access to a certain deployment, and you can really give them the ability to have transparency on being able to manage these tools. One thing that I'll mention here, the idea is that you don't have to go back into the Google Cloud console. You can manage everything here related to your infrastructure when it comes to our Cloud Manager modules. And then here on the cloud desktops is everything related to the Microsoft RDS technology. So that's kind of a high-level overview from an administrative standpoint, the benefits that itopia can provide. So one of the ways that we make it very easy to manage multi-regional deployments with various distinct groups of users is with a feature we call collection pools. So for the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to bounce back and forth from the presentation to a demo and really tie in and visualize what this actually means. So let's look in here to the platform. The first thing you're going to realize is we do have a multi-regional deployment. So this is necessary for two reasons. One, if you are a multinational organization, you'll need to access the same deployment possibly in different regions. Maybe you have engineers that are in Romania, but your main headquarters is in Europe, in London or UK, and you can actually spin up a data center that's near, the other part of Europe versus the data center that resides there in the UK. So now when your users go to log in, they can actually log into their files and be redirected automatically to the closest data center that's best for them. And I'll just show you here quickly. We do have a proprietary technology that allows us to download the username, and the user would be able to download a new RDP file, which gives them access to the desktop, and what you kind of see here going on in the top part of the screen. But they can download that file, and it would automatically be directed to the closest data center that is available to them. So just lastly, touching on this here, you'll see that this deployment resides in US Central, Europe West, Asia South, and Asia Northeast. So again, a lot of flexibility there. The second reason why a multi-region deployment is great is because this can also be your disaster recovery plan. Meaning, let's say my business headquarters is in the Northeast of the United States. Well, I can spin up my main deployment there and basically can spin up an identical deployment, feed data into that deployment, but then I can also turn all the servers off in that deployment because it's not in use. So you'll be able to store data, have a deployment that is up, ready to go whenever called on, and you're going to limit the cost to spin that up because we'll have the capability to turn off all of those servers since it's not active in production. So that's a kind of a high-level overview of the benefits and what it means to have a multi-regional deployment. Now, specific to breaking down users in specific different, what we call collection pools, it's really a benefit of the RDS protocol that we leverage today. So each one of these rows, imagine that there were different sets of user groups within your organization. So this first row could be accounting. Second row can be sales, operations, engineering, and so forth. Because each set of your users is going to need to access different applications. So when you come in here as an administrator, you can actually come in here and see the details of this specific location. So all the servers will be tied to this specific image that's serving up a certain set of applications to your users. So for instance, I'm logged into my Windows 10 virtual desktop through the browser, but you can see that I have access to these different sets of applications. A couple of Office suites, a Google Chrome, Visual Studio, even a full desktop. So again, all this is based on an image that's running into the background. And so without having every user requiring the same image, we can actually help create various collections and build this out, let's say for 10 users, hundreds of users, or thousands of users, whatever makes the most sense. But you'll be able to configure your image, your boot size, you can enable auto scaling on these machines, you can add additional servers. And so think of this as kind of a sub-deployment within a greater deployment. And you can even set different client settings, right? So some users could have access to their local files. Maybe some of your other users, they have to be totally locked down. So there's a lot of variable, benefits that you can find really granularizing the practice of looking at collection pools. So as you go back here, the one thing to take away, it's very easy to also set up a new collection. So it's as easy as coming here, naming your collection, giving it a description, seeing if it's a shared collection pool or a dedicated collection pool, selecting the region, and basically setting your auto scale configuration, some of your settings, and hit create. And you will automatically start to create servers related to that subset of users within this, what we call collection pool. So let's move on to the second feature of how we manage these multi-regional deployments that have different user segments. You'll see that our multi-user collection model that we just went over here shows us that we have several different collections. So on the back end, we have this collection 1 or 2 and 3. It shows the session hosts that are involved in there. And then you can see that we have additional collections as well that allow us to spin up different groups of servers with different images to then ultimately serve our different user bases, which may be, like I said, accounting, sales, operations, and they can all have their own dedicated servers, their own dedicated security measures. And again, it gives you a way to centrally control and manage a very diverse set of users. So what we find is with the large multifaceted deployments really comes significant cloud resources to equip all of the different performances and actions that your users require. However, each user group may have different hours of operation Most environments don't need to run 24/7. So we've actually developed a feature. One was the auto scaling, what you saw, but really our scheduled uptime allows you to stop and start individual virtual machines that are based on a preset schedule. And this is useful for when you know that environments do not need to be accessed. For instance, a call center. If you have 2 shifts of 8 hours, we know that the office is going to be shut down for the last 8 hours of the day. So we can also shut down our deployment. So we can save money outside of the time that those resources aren't being used. And it's also another great security because when it's not on, it can't be accessed. So let me just show you here how that works. So going back into our deployment, now again, the Cloud Manager modules are related to everything dealing with infrastructure. So you can quickly come here and see all the different virtual machines that are running this environment. And again, this is a multi-regional deployment that you see here. But really where it comes in is being able to set a schedule. So without having to write scripts, PowerShell, dig into GCP APIs, you can literally come here and you can see with this deployment, we have 4 different schedules running. So if I click on this first schedule, you'll see that it actually starts at 5 a.m. in the morning, turns off at 8 p.m. at night. Everything outside of these time parameters is actually money that is being saved by not consuming cloud resources. And this is one of the biggest differences you have to consider when you move from on-prem to the cloud. Services don't have to be accessed 24/7 typically, and you're now moving to a completely different business model. Instead of a lot of upfront CapEx, we're in a totally OpEx model where you truly only pay for what you use. So between the auto scaling feature you just saw, between the ability to schedule resources to turn up and down, we typically save our customers anywhere from 30 to 60% in Google compute cost. And again, it's just easy for you to create a schedule. You give it a name, you give it a description, you select the group or various groups of virtual machines that you want to set a schedule for. And it could be as simple as, hey, I have redundancy throughout my platform. Maybe I can't turn it off at night, but how about we scale back the machines that create the redundancy? So there's always ways to help you save money, and this is a great tool to help you get started. So another way that we simplify user data aggregation and we give you insights to optimize cloud cost, itopia has built a native integration with one of GCP's premier products. So we leverage BigQuery and we deploy this as part of every single one of our deployments, and it's on you, the customer, to really activate it. But you can see things like user activity, how many hours they online per day, how many times the session get connected and disconnected. You can see RAM and CPU from a resource utilization standpoint. Do we have too many CPUs oversubscribed, right? Do we not have enough? We can be proactive in making sure that we right-size these environments. Again, application utilization, file activity, and one of the most important things that we can provide is going to be insight to your billing data. So let's see how that looks. So now we've set up our deployment. We have our users in various groups. We have a schedule going. And here you can come to our insights module. And as you saw, we can look at user activity, some basic information here, how many users are online. We can also look at file activity. So we can understand, basically what files are the ones that are most accessed. What happens if you have so many licenses, but you realize no one's accessing the application? Again, there's another cost-saving measure by being able to bring data out of this environment. And of course, what applications are being used, how often. Again, another granular bit of insight that's fantastic for you to leverage. Now, lastly is a GCP billing. And this is really where you can activate the additional BigQuery technology. So actually, we don't have it configured, but I can show you a quick snapshot here from our homepage on our website. So when you actually activate the BigQuery, one of the things that will give you is a cost analysis. So you can understand exactly what you're paying for. If it's the OS, compute, storage, the networking, egress, ingress, your VPNs. So you really understand how much it costs to run this environment. Now, one thing that we do for all of our customers, after about 30, 45 days, we'll sit down with you and your team and we'll analyze your user consumption. So we'll actually be able to take a step back and say, hey, these are the peak hours, these are the off-peak hours, these are typically the active number of users, and we can typically find an additional 10 or 15% of savings for our customers based on understanding how their users are actually activating this environment. So let's move on in the presentation here. So when we think about best practices for unified management and new innovations of user application delivery, we really look to rely on one of our main partners, which is Liquidware, who's going to walk you through how you can further extend these deployments and really create a fully end-to-end unified management experience. So in that sense, I'll pass it over to Thomas, and thank you all very much.
Thank you, James. Hi, everybody. This is Thomas from Liquidware, and I'll take you to the second half of this presentation. Let's see if I can get the presentation. Here we go. Yes, we are good. Awesome. So quick recap. If you missed our previous webinars, sessions, or if you don't know about us, we are a workspace management solution provider. We've been running for 10 years, and our goal in life is to help you through your next desktop revolution, and clearly, in this case, moving your desktop to the cloud. We do three things. We have three solutions that complement platforms like itopia. We provide user environment management or profile management through a product called Profile Unity. We deliver application through application layering, slightly different than streaming, hosting, or virtual application, and we'll get a little bit more into that. And finally, we provide additional monitoring and diagnostics. This time going from the end user perspective inside the guest OS, inside the endpoint device. So Stratosphere UX monitors how or what you're doing with your desktop. So quick work on the first two products and how we work together. So if you consider if you went through the journey as Jim described it, so imagine yourself, you're logging into your different desktop with your different application. What FlexUp, oops, sorry, I have a little bit of echo. Looks like it's better. So what FlexUp will do is it allows you to lay your application on the fly. Think about the way you would install an application on your smartphone. FlexUp does exactly the same thing. You log in and your application shows up. We basically capture an application onto a VHD, which is a file that behave like a disk. And at logon, we can just snap it into the OS. It's native, it works natively. It's not just physically on the desktop you're logging into. So you can think about it as having an application installed on your D drive and mounting that when you log on. So those FlexUp handles that, and it simplifies a lot the application management. Remove the need to have all the application installed physically on the base image or on the local desktop, etc., etc. But FlexUp doesn't handle what changes you might made to those applications and to the OS. So if you look at the diagrams, the left side, the green side is all about profile. And profile are all tied to the user. We don't care about the desktop. So Profile Unity will work in conjunction with FlexUp and will capture maybe the change you may make to those applications. You open Chrome, you adding a new a shortcut, favorites, your default, I don't know, a start page. Those are not going to be captured by FlexUp. FlexUp's job is simply to deliver the application when you log in. And it's going to be a pristine app as it was captured. That's where Profile Unity comes in, and it's going to add those profiles. So the same app, the same VHD that will be delivered to user A and user B might look completely different with the addition of Profile Unity, as user B have made some change already and will see is shortcut, favorites, start page, etc., etc. And that will remain true for everything you layer on the desktop. Profile Unity will make sure that all the personalization that you make will follow you as a user. So think back to the example that James mentioned. You log in, those machines are powered on, or you don't need to have a local profile, and you don't need to have to log into the same desktop. I think one-on-one might create actually additional cost. So you can have a pull-up desktop, and when you log in, the profile and the personalization follow you. Let's dive into a couple of tips on best practice when it comes to manage. We're going to start with profile management, and a couple of things we're going to go through. The first one is I call it mind the gap, and it's just a quick mention on what happens when you implement Profile Unity. You're very likely to have done or have managed profile a different way before. A very common way is through GPO and login scripts. And Profile Unity is set up in a way where we're not going to force you to scratch everything you've done before. Actually, that's not something we recommend. And one of our first tips. If you have a way to manage some aspect of the profile, I'll take an example, file redirection. So all the folders and file direction is handled through your GPO. It's working really well, and you don't want to change that. Well, you don't have to. And I'll go further, you don't want to. There's no point in trying to change something that's not broken. So Profile Unity will basically mesh with whatever you have working that works. So you can do as little or as much as you want with Profile Unity. And one of the steps when you implement it is we typically sit down with customers and talk about how you're handling your profile. If there are aspects that are known, that are mastered, then don't touch it. Keep it this way. Just make sure you don't manage them as well with Profile Unity. You don't want two tools doing the same thing. It's also a good savings on what we call opportunity cost. There's no need to learn to do something you know very well and you're experts if it's working well. Next is all about scaling. I'm going to take you back to one of the slides. I don't have it, of course, but if you recall, James had a presentation around multi-collections and how itopia can break down users by group and set up their own pools of desktop. Now, it's very likely that in those cases, you might have different settings, profiles, rules, etc., that you want to apply to those different group of people. Same concept here. We can basically mimic exactly what the architecture you have with itopia, with Profile Unity. It's all based on what we call filters, context-aware filters. So we can tell Profile Unity, oh, you're in that collection group from itopia. Well, you're going to apply rule A, B, and C. Now, the trick here, and the reason I wanted to mention it is because you can apply those filters at different levels. If you look at the diagrams on the bottom right, I can have those filters based on individual users. If your name is Bob, then that's your printer. That's a good example, and so on and so forth. And that's very good and very practical, but it doesn't scale that well once you start to go beyond a few hundred users, 2,000, 5,000. It becomes a nightmare to have a filter for each individual user. So for those considerations, or for rules that apply to more than one user, you want to go to step 2, which is apply those filters to entire configuration. There's a couple subtleties there. You can apply a filter that applies to a group of users. So if you pop to this AD group and so on and so forth. Actually, it's worth mentioning that we have over 300 different variation of filters that we can use, and it's one of our strong points. So we can create filters based on who you are, based on AD, environment variables, and many things. The name of the naming convention of the desktop you're logging into, time of the day. We can actually even look at a file and if it exists, apply a filter or not, excuse me. So applying filters at the configuration level allows you to create maybe two different entire set of rules for two very different type of users. Salespeople in accounting, if you look at them, maybe they're completely different people. Absolutely, maybe sales need a lot more control, or maybe a better example might be accounting and QA, or Dave, or IT. IT might be a completely different animals in your environment, and there's not that much common rules in between the two. In those cases, don't bother having a single configuration with filters that apply whether you're IT or accounting. Create two config, apply the filter that config, so when you're IT, that config applies to you. That will save you a lot of time. Think about it as almost a pyramid. If you apply filters at the very top, you don't need those 20 filters down below because it's at the source. Now, as you keep scaling up and up and up, then that's where you can get creative with it. We allow you to run as many configurations as you want. We can apply more than one configuration to a user when logs in, and so on and so forth. So number 3 in the diagrams is almost the ultimate, where if you have a very diverse user base with a very diverse rules and settings, you can imagine example that comes to mind is different continents, different regions. APAC and Europe have completely different set of rules, but you want to have that single pane of glass, then single management. Well, in that case, you can think about it as almost like a master and sub configuration. Having a master configuration that will handle your common corporate rules. Think that applies to everyone. That will be applied to everybody, no filters. And then you have subconfig config 1 that will only apply, or basically be the complements and only apply to accounting. Subconfig B only applies to IT. And this way, again, the idea here is to be lazy, kind of, and not having to duplicate configuration or filters when you don't need to. Right, a few more things or tips on best practice when it comes to managing profile. Big debate, and in that one there's no pros and cons, but just so you know that we have two very different approaches when it comes down to the user profile, aka his preferences, his settings. You can apply what we call profile disk. Profile disk will be similar to FS Logic, where it's a big file, a VHD in our case, that we mount when the user logs in, and it's got everything, all the profiles. So the pros of the profile disk is it's really simple to set up. There's little management. It's basically a VHD file. You log in, we mount it. The other approach is what we call portability, where we don't use a big file. We have a set of preset rules that, for lack of better words, function almost as backup and restore. You log in, we restore your settings. You log out, we back up your settings. What's the difference? Well, the second option is obviously a little bit more labor intensive, as you can imagine, because we back up and restore. But we've been doing that for 10 years, and we can bring portabilities to sub 3 or 4 seconds. So it doesn't take a huge tax on the login time. The benefit of portability is, basically it's in its name, it's very portable. I can take a user from physical to virtual using portability. I don't need to worry about where my profile disk or my file is. I'll just follow me through. So a lot more flexible. It's also very resilient when it comes down to profile corruption. So when it comes down to portability, I like it because profile can be corrupted, and portability, we have a built-in backup that will keep the 10th, I think by default it's the 10th iteration of profiles, then we can restore back. So we're almost profile corruption proof. The one shot is very easy to set up. But if my profile corrupted, it's in that DHT, the same as any default profile management tool, same as Logic, etc. So you have to balance the pros and cons. Backup consideration. I'm not going to steal the thunder from HYCU because they're awesome at it, and I didn't mean that as backing up your desktop. The couple things you want to consider when setting up Profile Unity and profile management. The configuration itself, all those rules, all the work you put into the management console is stored as a file. It makes perfect sense, and you can export, you can save, you can download, and you can import a file. So once you set up and you have your different configurations created, just export them, save them somewhere else in a DR, in a file server, doesn't matter. And that's really all you need to back up the entire policies and rules for your entire environment. Think about how complicated it would be for AD if you don't have file replication. Now you just need to save that file. You could lose Profile Unity. I can destroy the server, set up a new one, import the file, you're up and running. All the filters, all the configuration, everything's back up. So one thing to keep in mind, it takes 2 seconds, but just to keep a file somewhere will save you a lot of time. Last thing, and it's something we'll see, and I'll circle back a little bit at the end, is you want to make sure that your base image is optimized. There's many ways to do that, but when it comes down to running as a virtual machine, specifically on cloud, you don't want, there's a lot of steps in Windows that you want to take that don't mess up your environments. At worst, they'll consume resource that you don't want to. I'm thinking about, auto updates and screensaver and that type of thing. There's many things you need to take the time to take a look, and it's very important that the base image, the image you're going to use as moving forward, are as clean and have as little noise as possible. Now, most platforms, including Microsoft, have articles and KB article on how to optimize your image. So you can go to Microsoft and look at it. We actually created our own. I put the link here, but if you're curious, just go to our community website, which is community@liquidware.com. You can search for, I think if you search for Optimize, and you'll find that link. Now let's move to application layering. We kind of cover a couple of best practices, and I'll walk you through them. The first one is all about application lifecycle. So quick recap, application layering is super simple. You have two consoles. You have what we call a packaging console, which is that you'll spin up on a virtual machine, and that's where you're going to actually package the application. Now, the packaging itself, the process is fairly straightforward. You basically tell FlexUp, hey, I'm going to package an application. You're going to point to an installer or manually launch the installer, and then you just let the application installer do its thing, and we're capturing everything in the backend. But having said that, where it gets complicated is how do we fit into your own application lifecycle? My guess is in your environment, the person that is the application owner is not necessarily the person that's going to be responsible for your itopia environment. Two different people, two different roles. So you want to mimic the best you can your own roles and responsibility with the different console and access in FlexUp. And I'll have an example coming up right after this. Application delivery option is another one. So you don't have to flex up all the application, and you don't want to flex up all the application. So you have a different, whenever you're looking at your application strategy, and that's really how you want to think about it. You're moving to itopia is, what's the best way to deliver my application to my end user? There are some applications that should be in the base image, no question. And those traditionally are the application that everybody uses. So most of the deployment we've seen, you're going to find the usual suspect. Office, the web browser, and maybe a few of the, I would say, most common apps, things like Adobe Reader, etc., etc. The rest is more a question of how many users are accessing the application, how many need it really, and how often do they need that. And that's where FlexUp comes in as an option. Having the application hosted is also a perfect option. And by the way, FlexUp will function or will deliver an application to a desktop or to a hosted server. So you can imagine having application being hosted. That's if you're going with multi-10, multi-user, Win10 session, etc. You could decide to stream the application, have them hosted, etc., and still on the back end have them provisioned for FlexUp. Another thing you wanted to think about is I mentioned earlier that the way FlexUp functions by default is you receive or the application gets mounted at logon. And that's not exactly true. It's one of the options and the default one, but you can actually choose to have the application layer at boot. So when the application, when the desktop launch, that's a great option for any hosted application, hosted servers. Windows 2012, 2010, you want to have that set of application, have them layer at boot. So this way they're ready, and you still maintain the flexibility when it comes down to FlexUp and the benefits of layering. Talking about which, one of the benefits of FlexUp, because you might be thinking, well, why should I put an application on the desktop if I'm going to use it anyway? It consumes the same resource, and that's true. So for example, if we go back to the hosted application, what's the benefit? Well, one of them is the updates and the upgrade. I can update any application without causing zero downtime, either to my master image or my user. I can actually upgrade an application while the user is in session using his app. It doesn't mean that his app is suddenly magically is going to go from version 1 to 2. But what it means is that I can capture or update my existing application. Let's say it's version 1. I can, using my packaging console, I can offline upgrade that application, get it number 2, go testing, UAT, QA, etc., etc. When it's ready, in my configuration, just going to replace 1 by 2. Does that mean 1 goes away? No, you don't want to destroy it yet. So I can do that. Let's see, today is Tuesday, middle of the day. I just updated application version 1 to 2. What's going to happen is all the users that are connecting right in session right now are still seeing and have the application version 1 mounted. As soon as they log off, and next time they log on, they'll see version 2. That's how you handle upgrades, and that's how you remove a lot of the headache and more importantly, the downtime tied to that. So let's take a look at the application Lifecycle and what I mean by that. So this is one example, and usually in large organization, this graph would be 10 times more complicated because of your own process. But I wanted to at least address some of the core buckets or tasks that are where we usually integrate within your process. And the reason I mentioned that, by the way, is that we truly believe that if our tools force you to change your process, it's not going to stick. It will be more difficult to integrate. And so it's very important for us to make sure that we adapt to your process rather than the other way around. If you're moving your user from VDI on premises or physical to the cloud, you're already going through some major change. If you can stick with your default process in the meantime, that's going to make that transition a lot more successful. So typically in any given organization, when it comes down to application lifecycle, it comes down in 3 buckets. The first one is what we call the packaging or installing the app. Now, as I mentioned, packaging console are just an application running on a virtual machine. In our case, on itopia. Those one you want to be probably domain join, something you can revert back to a snapshot if the application is not well behaved and starts messing up with your OS. You want them as clean as possible back to the optimization. and you can have as many packaging console as you want. You don't pay for it. So you can imagine that if you have different silo or different application owner, you could almost give them, each of them, access to one of the packaging console. And their job as application owner is to do what they do best, install application. The learning curve on the packaging console is super fast. We're talking about probably 5 clicks that they have to understand and be done with it. The time to package is about the time to install an app. No difference. You may consider we take 10 seconds to check those boxes and be done. So there's no additional complexity involved there. Once you package the application, those are VHD file that you're going to save somewhere on the file share, or in case of FlexUp, directly on a Google storage if you don't want to pay more. Now that's where the second phase comes in. Those persons that package the apps are not necessarily the one that are going to be assigned to the job of either testing those apps, doing any pre-prod, UAT configuration. They may not have access to the environment, and definitely they're not the one that in production is going to decide or do the job of saying, okay, who gets that app? Oh, this app is for accounting, etc. So that's going to jump into the management console. And by the way, that's the same management console for simplicity purposes than Profile Unity. So the same person that manage user profile also have the ability to manage the application, the layering. Now you can imagine having different directories or buckets that will host those VHD, those apps, as they go through the different phases, QA, UAT, pre-prod. So right until that time, they might not be visible to the production guy. And we also have different roles and responsibilities to the management console. So if you're completely siloed up, you can imagine having the QA manager having access to Profile Unity console to do the app assignments, but only has access to the QA environment, and so on and so forth, all the way to the production environment. So quick recap, you can basically, using roles and responsibility, but also the flexibility of packaging console, the freeform if you want the standalone, you can insert the different components of FlexUp within the organization so it fits that process. Right, I'm going to speed up a little bit because I realize we're getting close to the end. The last piece I wanted to mention is about Stratosphere. And I won't say too much because we collect a lot of information. I could spend the next 3 hours talking about all the metrics. I would just say this. We complement the information you get from BigQuery and itopia by looking inside the guest OS, either inside the itopia VM or from the endpoint perspective. A couple examples are, for example, James mentioned billing and the visibility that you get in fine-tuning and understanding how much do you consume. Well, we can come on the back end to explain why you're consuming. So you see a lot of egress network, doesn't make sense. We'll tell you what user, what application, what machine are causing that egress network, and so on and so forth. Same idea with scheduling. We typically use Stratosphere before, during, and after deployment or migration. As you're trying to figure out the schedule and what's the best schedule to save you money, or even if you just want to have an idea of how much it would cost you. Well, we track every user. All the information is timestamped. We're very much a historical database by default. So to tell you, we can look at over the time, let's say on your existing environment, and tell you exactly how many users are logged in at 8 a.m., 8:01, 8:05, all the way to 7 p.m. So you can look at it, normalize over a week, and very, very simply adjust and create your schedule based on what you've learned. The last 3 things I'll let you with Stratosphere is, I would say, information aligned to the different target audience. So we built Stratosphere as a tool. Marketing would kill me to say that because it's a solution, but really in my mind, it's a tool. And to do, for us, one of the goal was to grab the information was one thing, and we track all the information you can think of. We'll track the remote session. We even track what we call the first or last mile will tell you how weak or strong the Wi-Fi signal is. And we can tell you, how far you are from your router. So we track everything. But I think all that huge information is not that useful if you want to deliver some information to a VP or director and give him a gigantic spreadsheet. It's not going to read it, doesn't care, and so on and so forth. So there are tools built into Stratosphere that allows you to provide different level of information based on the different recipients. This one, for example, was made as our customers were starting work from home and wanted a very high level perspective on how my user doing. So it's a very executive level. As you can see on the top left, it's 3 numbers. I've got X number of user connected, 2 users at risk, so that I have problems on 2 users, and so far I'm at 41% capacity. I'm good so far. Going down one level, we have similar dashboard or reports that are more designed to the management level at your IT level. Those could be, for example, in that case, right, I have 2 users at risk, or I need to know how things are going, but for real. What type of issue am I facing with? Is that network? Is that application that are crashing? Is that user that have remote access problem, etc.? So one level down, and we'll group the information that way. And then finally, you can actually drill down and get actually the full data. You want to see all the username, or you want to see the data, I don't know, CPU usage minute by minute on an entire environment, or all the application being used. Yeah, we got that. So you can drill down all the way down. Final slide, then I'll wrap up with that. I wanted to share, as far as management best practice, the top 10 mistakes we've seen as a company. I mentioned when I started my section that we've been in the business of helping users going through their desktop revolution. We've been in business for 10 years. We started with the beginning of VDI. So we've seen things. We've had some experiences, let's put it this way. And throughout the ages, because it sounds like ages, we started to create what we call a health check. Health check is more like a service that we offer our customers, where we come in and using Stratosphere, we take a look and see everything that's wrong, or try to explain why things are not running as they should. And from there, I took the top 10, and they're not in any order particularly. So I wouldn't call the number 1 more important than the other one, but wanted to share what we've seen as far as common mistakes. The first one, almost called it number 1, but yep, the first one is no discovery. And there's a lot of things being tied to that. The whole idea here is companies just jumping off the cliff and says, let's see what happens. Although I wouldn't recommend to do like a 6 months analysis and audit of your environment, measure everything, etc. It's costing you too much time. But I think a basic discovery, just to understand a couple things, like what do you have today? What are you actually using? So you can tell what you're going to need. It's going to save you from making a lot of mistakes that could be costly. It could save you, for example, to basically undersizing or oversizing the environments drastically. And we've seen both. We've seen oversizing because people are looking at what they have installed on a desktop and they make an educated guess on how much they're going to need. And as a result, they're running on desktops that run 5% CPU, 20% memory all the time, wasting money. Undersizing is usually when the vendor's involved and try to say, no, it's not going to cost that much. You could run that SAP on 1 CPU and 2 GB of memory, no problem, and get the budget approved, and then you're left with dealing with people running with CPU queue of 10 and paging like crazy. So I think a basic discovery, not guess, but just really understanding what application I use, what do they have, will save you a lot of trouble later. Master image optimization, we covered that before. I can't stress that enough. A lot of issues we see come from the fact that those golden images, those base image, are not necessarily pristine. Antivirus, I don't mean antivirus as a mistake itself. It's the configuration of antivirus. You don't necessarily want something that's going to be triggered every time a file is open or a file is loaded, especially in the cloud environments where your user profile, your user documents or application are not local loaded on the desktop. So every time you access those, it might spike an antivirus scan. The quick of it is, don't have your antivirus behave like it was on the physical desktop. That's going to be a mistake because it's going to create a lot of havoc. GPO and script, again, by themselves, not an issue. What you don't want is a GPO or script, and we've seen that. We typically see that during pilots, where in order to go fast, what they do is set up a pilot, and they just apply the same GPO to their users. Why not? And what you usually find is a ton of errors message and slow down, because there's part of the script that's looking for, I don't know, a local file, a local printer, doesn't find it. So spin around, make a bunch of errors. So once you go to production, clean up the GPO, have a quick filter, make sure you don't have anything that actually applies, that would apply into your environment on premises, but not in the cloud. Configuration, obviously, one thing I'll mention, configuration, this is more of, what's the size of the VM you're going to need, etc. And thank God, itopia have all those tools that allows you to simplify that configuration, so it's not a huge bother. One thing I'll mention related to both configuration and GPO and actually it's later in there, the DC latency is something we see quite often, where we see people going into a pilot and suddenly login goes up by 40 seconds. The latency itself doesn't necessarily explain that. And it's very simple. You have domain controller on premises. You don't have one in your domain, in your cloud domain. Well, every time you log in, it's going to go back to premises to try to log in. Bring a copy of your domain controllers in your pilot environment, in your production environment. You're going to solve yourself a lot of troubles. No log off is more like a user issue. Users that are not necessarily trained to log off, they just walk away from the desktop, just click the X button. If you don't have a mechanism that's going to shut down that session is going to remain open forever. So make sure you use the tools available to you or enforce policy to kill those sessions. You're in the cloud. Every time you stay logged in, you're going to pay for it. So that's a big one. Hardware graphic acceleration is a minor one, but something we see very often. A lot of applications have by default hardware graphic acceleration turned on. On a physical desktop, it's not a problem. On a virtual desktop, where you're very likely not having a GPU card, the trick here is that most applications, even though you don't have a GPU card, Windows is going to present itself as a GPU card. It's going to look at the processor and says, yeah, no, I've got a GPU. It's not a NVIDIA or ATI card. It's basically a fake, not really a fake card, but it's a Windows card. Turn that off, because if you have it, it's going to try to use it, and the end result is you're going to slow down the CPU more than what you need. DC latency, scheduled task. You don't want any scheduled task ever. Windows updates, anything like that. Again, same concept. Any scheduled task in a shared environment is likely to create problems, have spikes, because you're sharing those CPU, those compute, those network, and you don't want all those desktops to start doing the same thing at the same time. Last I'll mention, this one is almost with a smile on my face. This is not that critical, but something we see from time to time. Software reporter tool is actually part of Chrome, and it's an option, I think, in the web browser, that it's something tied to the anonymous reporting of application you use. The reason I put it in that list is, if you have that turned on by default, you're going to generate a ton of network traffic. As every time you open an app, Chrome is going to report that to Google, and you're just creating unnecessary traffic. Screensaver, obviously goes without saying. Not a good idea. I'll just leave it at that. Right, and this concludes, and almost made it in time, this concludes our session management. Hope it was useful. As you can see, this is the third in our four-part series. Next one is going to be next week, and it's going to be exciting. It's all about data protection for itopia desktop, and it's going to be more about how to debunk the myth that if you have snapshot in the cloud, you're all set, and replication. And HYCU will be the center stage in this presentation to explain how you're still at risk and how you can handle it.
Well, thank you, Thomas. Appreciate the thorough presentation, and James as well. I know that we're a little bit over time, so what we'll do for this session is we'll take any questions and cover them offline with the groups. So thank you very much. Keep an eye on your inbox for a link for the recording for not only this session, but the previous 2 sessions, and a link for the registration to that session that Thomas was just talking about. That wraps up our webinar series. So thank you very much all for attending, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.